Welcome to Know What I Mean. My name is George.
My name's Oscar. I've now got a microphone. I hope you can hear the difference. I feel different. I've still got it attached to an ironing board, but I'm slowly upgrading my kit. So I'm going to read out this week's quote. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. By James Baldwin, who's a American novelist and activist.
So yeah, we got into some really cool stuff with this quote. We talked about bringing awareness to your problems and the value of that. Oscar brought a really cool story about 𝗚𝗲𝗿𝗏. I think that's how he says that. Yeah. It's like a Buddhist story about him facing demons. We talked about me getting hangry, which was semi-related to the podcast. And we also talked about Oscar's because Oscar's been doing graffiti for a large part of his life, discussed him discovering what was actually been driving him this whole time. Oscar prepared very well for this podcast, and I felt a little bit underprepared. But I think it's a good podcast.
Yeah, man. So. Yeah. I know George said last week that last week was his favorite, but this is my favorite, definitely. I had a lot of fun doing this one, and it was really nourishing, actually. I feel great. So I hope you enjoy. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. It's by James Baldwin. I'd heard the name, but I didn't really know about this person beforehand, and mentioned in the last episode, I did find this quote on Instagram. So I'm just putting it all out there right in the start, at the start. But looking into him, he was an American novelist and activist and poet. A lot of his work's around racial issues, sexuality, class distinctions. There's a lot around the civil rights movement, a lot around activism. He's obviously a very influential figure. And this quote also stands alone without that. So I think, interestingly, we talked about last week kind of discovering that context is massive with this. It's interesting that I read this quote just as an isolated thing and thought it was very strong, but that reading a bit more into the context, it came from a newspaper article in 1962, and that was like the full swing of the civil rights movement. And I couldn't read the article, didn't have access to it, but well, it was potentially talking about outward action and activism. But the first thing that came to mind for me was much more an inward focus. How can we acknowledge what is going on inside of us and really face our demons and face our kind of shadow side in doing that? So I paraphrased, or I changed it a bit, just because I found that trying it a few different ways out in my mind is quite helpful. So not everything you become aware of, you can do something about, but you can't do anything about something you're not aware of. And the key areas with this quote were, so accepting the things we can't change, and how this can be a really transformational and powerful thing to do. Maybe giving up the fight with certain things that we acknowledge, but we can't do anything about them at that time. And also the area of why do we choose to not face things? Because I know in my life, and like most people's lives, we've got things that we're not willing to acknowledge, or it takes us a very, very long time to really be brave enough to look into things. And I've definitely really noticed in my life that a big part of growing up is opening more and more to those kind of shadow parts of ourself or myself that I haven't been willing to look at previously, or haven't been strong enough to deal with previously. You know, the words that come to mind are like bravery, difficult decisions, seeing things fully, taking full responsibility for what's going on in ourselves. And I like the word responsibility because it's like responsibility, like the ability to respond. We are empowered to respond to what's going on. Also, the other side of the quote of being that accepting that not everything is changeable. We can't change everything, but that the awareness is paramount. So like throughout the quote, not everything that is faced. So face, that's like awareness, can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced, until it is brought into awareness. So the awareness of what's going on and the willingness to look is really the key in this quote. I feel that's what's being really encouraged, is to say, just look at what's going on. And maybe it was talking about look at what's going on in the world, look at the injustice. In my case, then it's, look at what's going on in my emotional life, or what I'm not willing to look at, and try and turn towards it. Those are my initial thoughts on the quote.
Really interesting to hear the context of it, because that always flips it, and quite often we end up coming with something that may be quite different from how it was originally intended. Yeah, I came up with a fairly similar sort of thing. You can have the compulsion to just not face things and to just kind of ignore them. There's something very dangerous in leaving things lurking under the surface, and when that happens, they can kind of end up manifesting in other ways, like that frustration because you haven't dealt with something, you haven't faced certain thoughts or certain insecurities and things, and that means that they can end up running your life in a way because you haven't focused your awareness on those things.
Yeah, it's these things are pulling strings and dictating our lives when they go unfaced. If you're not aware, if you've chosen to be ignorant or just generally not aware of what's going on, it could be having a huge amount of influence over your life, and you're just not aware of it. You can't see how that's happening. And it's so, I think it's one of those things that's more obvious to notice it in others than ourselves, because the denial, it can be a bit like a house of cards situation. Like we're lying to ourselves about something, or we're choosing to not acknowledge something, and by taking the step to acknowledge it, it can often feel like even a small step is extremely scary, because as soon as you acknowledge that you have been pushing something away or pretending something doesn't exist, it pulls into question all the decisions you've made in connection with that. It puts into question all the potential things that you're actually hiding from yourself. The choice to really delve in and go into this shadow side, this like darker side, the side that hasn't been acknowledged, is, yeah, it's a very brave act, because you don't know what's there. You don't know what's going to be revealed.
I liked how you kind of took the two sides of it, how like as well as facing things and finding the things you can change, it's really important to realize the things that you can't change. And I think that's equally valuable. I hadn't really thought about that other side of it.
Well, it's often the case where, say, you're dealing with an emotional issue, particularly if it's something related to childhood or it's trauma, it's going to be really big, and definitely initially you're not going to be able to change it. It's something that will maybe erode or change over a long period of time with awareness, but you have to be willing to acknowledge that it's there and welcome it on some level as being a part of your life. But you might not there and then be able to actually take action and change that thing. But I think there is something interesting in, like, because I guess something that maybe isn't picked up in this quote or captured in it is, because I would actually argue that awareness of something, even though it may not be like actively changing it, the awareness of the thing is transformational in itself. In my experience, say I've spent the day snacking a lot, I'm picking up my phone a lot, I'm obviously uncomfortable, like something's rumbling under the surface, something's going on, because I keep on reaching out to distract myself in a way that's much more like feverish than I would do usually. I will spend the day doing that, and then usually what I find is, if I actually swivel the camera around and like look inwards, what I'm running away from is a feeling. It's a sense of like dis-ease in the body. It's like a sense of like discomfort, something's wrong. There might be the thought that something's wrong, but it might not even be obvious what it is. It's literally just a feeling. And as soon as I really fully acknowledge that feeling, then something shifts. But it has to be acknowledged in a particular way. It can't be, I'm going to acknowledge you in order for you to go away. It has to be acknowledged and really seen. Say if it's like a real sense of dread or something, like that might be in my stomach or whatever, it has to be welcomed on some level. I think it's got to be like, I'm okay with you being here for now, as opposed to, yeah, I'm fine with you being here for now, but I want you to like just get out the way as soon as possible. Because then as soon as that resistance is there or that manipulation is there, then you're wrestling with it still. It's just a much more subtle form of wrestling. I've actually got a story, a proper story I mean, my stories that I tell about my own life are proper, but this is an old story and it's not by me. So it's a Buddhist story, and it's about this guy, 𝗚𝗲𝗿𝗿. One day, 𝗚𝗲𝗿𝗿 left his cave to gather firewood. And when he returned, he found that his cave had been taken over by demons. There were demons everywhere. His first thought upon seeing them was, I have to get rid of them. He lunges toward them, chasing after them, trying forcefully to get them out of his cave, but the demons are completely unfazed. In fact, the more he chases them, the more comfortable and settled in they seem to be. Realizing that his efforts to run them out have failed miserably, 𝗚𝗲𝗿𝗿 opts for a new approach and decides to teach him the Dharma. The Dharma is the Buddha's teaching. If chasing them out won't work, then maybe hearing the teachings will change their mind and get them to go. So he takes his seat and begins teaching about existence and non-existence, compassion and kindness, the nature of impermanence. After a while, he looks around and realizes that all the demons are still there. They simply stare at him with their huge bulging eyes. Not a single one is leaving. At this point, 𝗚𝗲𝗿𝗿 lets out a deep breath of surrender, knowing now that these demons will not be manipulated into leaving, and that maybe he has something to learn from them. He looks deeply into the eyes of each demon and bows, saying, It looks like we're going to be here together. I open myself to whatever you have to teach me. In that moment, all the demons but one disappear. One huge and especially fierce demon with flaring nostrils and dripping fangs is still in there. So 𝗚𝗲𝗿𝗿 lets go even further. Stepping over to the largest demon, he offers himself completely, holding nothing back. He puts his head into the demon's mouth. At that moment, the largest demon bows low and dissolves into space.
Wow, that's a really cool story.
Yeah, that was from a website called 𝗢𝘀𝗸𝗿𝗏, but I read it pretty much word for word, so I wanted to acknowledge them.
There's a lot of things which you can use the metaphor of demons for. There are some things where the hold that they have on you, the fear that you have of confronting that thing is propping it up. Your resistance to it is what's giving it power. The resistance implies something else. How you're acting implies that there is some horrible demonic force acting on you. Mm-hmm. And when you're behaving as if a horrible demonic force is acting upon you, that's exactly the same as if the demonic force is acting upon you.
Yeah.
That's the funny thing. It's exactly the same experience.
It's the monster under the bed.
Yeah. You know, you've got to just look and be like, no. But you're going there.
Oh, bitch.
Well, you know, never know. It might be there this time.
Not today.
A lot of us are lucky enough to be in a position where our struggles are not whether we're going to eat. For a lot of people now, the main demons and the main problems end up being of a more psychological nature. It's really helped me if I've, for whatever reason, been feeling anxious or loss or anything like that, being able to really sit with the physical experience of it. And it's not like, say, you know, if you've lost someone, it's not like you're trying to get rid of that. You're just accepting that and really feeling those feelings rather than trying to resist it. It's not like you're going into it to instantly banish it. Just appreciate that. Like you said, if you're going with the intention of like, oh, let me just bring awareness to it so it disappears, if you kept resisting that feeling, it would just continue longer.
Yeah. I think a really interesting bit of that story is the middle bit. So obviously the first bit where he's chasing the demons away, it's trying to fight them, but it's also not facing them. It's the equivalent of remaining ignorant or just denying their existence. So that scene could also be, instead of running around trying to hit them with bats or whatever, you know, like it could be he walks into the cave and sees the demon, is terrified, but then kind of pretends that they're not there. That could also be another start to the story, which might be more in line with this quote. The middle bit is the really interesting bit. When he tries to teach them the Dharma, he tries to manipulate the demons into leaving, essentially. You know, he says, I will accept you here on the condition that you leave.
Got you. Yeah.
And that's much more the area that I feel a connection to, I guess, because my experience within my spiritual path, because I've been kind of interested in it since I was a teenager. So I guess I've had a long time of reconditioning myself into other ways of thinking about life based on these kind of spiritual ideas. Because, you know, at 17, I was only kind of partly formed, I guess, but then came in all these different spiritual ideas that I could exchange my usual ideas with. But what I found was it's so easy to use spiritual ideas to try and manipulate your way out of feeling certain things. So you sit down to meditate on the condition that you will feel good. You're acting in life on the condition that it will do what you want. That's what I find so interesting about this middle bit of the story is that thing of it being on the condition of the demons leaving, and how different that is compared to actually fully facing something. Because as you said, you know, fully facing something is like an alchemical reaction. Like it's the resistance to the monster under the bed is the monster. It's the fear of it that is it in most cases. Like I have this image of a tiny mouse, right? But then you've got a really bright torch, but the torch is shining on the mouse on the side. So the mouse's shadow is enormous. And if you were to see that shadow, you might assume that it's something really big. But the reality is it's something very small, you know, and that's my experience of processing emotions. You know, I might go on retreat and then actually sit with this feeling of discomfort and just find it is just a feeling. The suffering really was me trying to run away from it. That was the suffering aspect of it, as opposed to actually fully seeing it for what it is, really.
This may be seen as kind of a passive thing. Say if you were doing this through like meditation or something, you're like, okay, let me just take some time to let my thoughts settle. But I would say that is, in a way, a very active thing. It's like a commitment to life, like you're engaging in life. You're not trying to distract yourself away from things. You're like, look, this is my body and my mind, and let me just see what's happening with it. And just see what's going on, see if there's things that it can teach me or things that I've been ignoring, and just really face those things and put your awareness onto it and do it, even though it's something that's not comfortable in the short term. Say if you've got a meditation practice, you're not doing it so that you can just get good feelings. It's not like a drug in that sort of way. It's not like a little thing that's going to give you a little bonus. In terms of drugs, it'd be more like a psychedelic. You're going into it and you don't quite know what's going to happen, if it's going to be good or bad. So it's kind of a very different type of experience to like, I don't know, a shot of coffee or something like that. Something that's just going to give you a little bit of extra energy, make you feel good and ready for the day. Now, it can also do that, you know, great thing to do at the start of your day or the end of the day. And it can make you feel better, but it's not confusing that as the end result. Like the end result isn't just to feel better, it's the practice of being in tune with what's happening. Yeah,
it's a good way of making the distinction, because I have found myself getting frustrated with the mindfulness movement and like headspace and things like that, where I suppose it can come across like an equivalent to like having a smoothie. You're doing something healthy and it's like, or going for a jog or whatever. It's just like, on one level for me, that's like fine. You know, if I think everyone should meditate, and I think everyone would benefit from it, whatever way it's described, that's fine. If some people find that format of it being another little accessory to my well-being, that is fine. But that's not the original intention of it. I think what's captured in this story is much more in line with what meditation is intended for. It's facing things. It's really acknowledging, because we're so tangled up, you know, our conditioning is so complicated, you know, and if you believe in trauma gets passed down through generations as well, we're actually born with a lot of stuff going on the stuff that isn't faced, that's like the behind the scenes, you know, like that's what's pulling the strings and like dictating what's going on in your life. It may be hidden, but as long as it's hidden and completely unacknowledged, then it rules essentially what you end up doing. If you have a tendency to be triggered by particular situations, if you have a really strong aversion to like a type of person, or a lot of, I mean, I would argue like almost all the world's issues, if you're to look at them from like a psychological perspective, is based on a mixture of like bad ideas that people have, but mainly like trauma, unacknowledged pain and suffering that we have, that people spend their entire lives finding a way of placating and calming that sense of discomfort down. We all want to be happy, and people killing people and ruining the environment through like terrible business practices and things like that, that's all somewhere deep down an attempt towards happiness, but it's an attempt that is dictated by unacknowledged trauma, by not fully looking at what is happening. Like, why do I feel so unhappy? Why do I feel like hurting someone? In my opinion, like the heroes, you know, of society are people who go into prisons and work with prisoners to try and work through some of this trauma, youth workers and stuff who are also working with this, and like really getting people that are obviously struggling and trying to help unravel some of this trauma that is actually causing all of these actions in the first place. And that's why I think it's such a radical thing. And that's why it frustrates me when it's like, it's put as a nice little, like, oh, that's a nice thing to do. It's underselling it so much, you know, like it's the potential of this stuff is transformational for the world.
Hadn't quite thought of it like that before, of like how much good it could do if everyone meditated. I think it's a really valuable thing to do. The more that you feel like you don't want to meditate, probably the more you should. It can be a really interesting experience to just notice how your mind works. I'm so interested by it. I'm just curious to kind of see what's going on and what happens in my mind. It's like an interesting thing to watch, and you can learn so much about yourself. You will start to realize like, damn, all of my thoughts are really like this, or like, this seems to be the thing that I get particularly triggered by or annoyed by. I think that's a great one, is like, it's very easy to notice other people doing this, but it's harder to notice yourself. But noticing things where you have a disproportionate reaction, there's things that someone's done, it just suddenly makes you really angry or really frustrated. You're right that just having the awareness on those things means that you've kind of got it a bit more in check, and you're not just on this like driving your car with a blindfold on, putting your foot down, just like, oh, let's go, let's get there, let's get there. It's something where facing it as soon as possible is better, but it's never too late to face it.
I guess just to bring in a personal example, I have been into graffiti probably since I was like 8 or something. I was interested in it when I was growing up in London, and it's just stuck with me as a thing that I do. As Buddhism and spirituality came into my life, I guess I was just questioning a lot more like what my motives are and like ethics and things like that. So it's made the whole experience of painting and the whole scene of graffiti quite confusing to navigate for me. Because of this thing, there's like a lot of unfaced and like kind of confusing like conditions that are at play, like a desire to paint, and at the same time like a feeling like, is it an ethical thing to do? Like, is it like selfish? Am I like, you know, I'm painting my name on things, like what the hell is that? You know, it's like the most egotistical thing I could do. And I was on a retreat 1.5 years ago, and this was, at that time I was going on quite a few like longer retreats, like it's all relative, but like week long or like 9 days. And this was a 9-day retreat, and we have this ritual with like a number of people in the shrine room, and there's like chanting and things, and it's very expressive. And after that was done, and this is usually the case, then people generally leave the shrine room. There's also an option to carry on like meditating, and I usually do that because after one of these rituals, it's the kind of the sense in the room is very, very still, and it's, I think something about you've been singing and your whole body's been vibrating and you've been getting up and moving around the room, and like, so you have to imagine that I'm feeling quite after like days and days of meditating, like feeling quite soft and like open, and this intuition to just quit graffiti just came up, you know, just like, there we have it. All right, it's over. Basically, it was just like, it just came up and it was like, that's it, done. And I got back from this retreat and deleted my Instagram, which felt quite symbolic. And the old name that I was painting was gone. And so all this happened. And then in the last just under a year, it's been kind of creeping back in, and I've been opening up to painting again. And it's because I think when I made the decision to quit, like a lot of where that decision came from was a sense of guilt or like frustration at myself, and a sense that I couldn't integrate what I was doing with my spiritual life. And that felt appropriate at that time. But in the last year, then it felt like actually there was a way of integrating. So this was going on, and I was introducing graffiti back into my life. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was reflecting in the evening and just really realized that the reason why I do graffiti and the reason why I do art, not the whole reason, but like a big part of the reason, is just that I want to be acknowledged and I want to be appreciated and loved, you know, like that's it, you know, and painting on things, putting it on Instagram and is a way of me getting that. And it was such a simple realization that really has gone back such a long time of me not really seeing it for what it was. That is at the root of my movement to do graffiti. And upon realizing that, like, all me quitting and having all of this conflict around it and all that kind of thing, it made me realize that that was me not fully facing it, and I was pushing it away and not wanting to acknowledge what was at the root of it, which is just a human desire to be accepted. It's very, very straightforward. And having this realization now as an adult and someone who's more comfortable in my own skin, you know, it's like there was no sense of like resistance. It was just like, more than anything, I just felt a lot of like compassion for myself. You know, it's just like, oh, that's nice. You just want people to like you. There's nothing wrong with that. I think before I really saw my desire to paint as being a symbol of like selfishness or like that something was majorly wrong, when it came down to it and really acknowledging it, it was just very, very simple desire to be liked.
Yeah, it's always been interesting listening to you talk about graffiti over the time I've known you. They were still in conflict. You hadn't really kind of accepted it and really like acknowledge what was at the core of it, and just realize like, oh yeah, it's just because, you know, I want people to like see my stuff and be like, oh, that's cool, I like what you've done, like that's a good piece of work.
But that's not a spirit, you know, that somehow doesn't fit into the spiritual ideal. You know, ideally, I shouldn't care what people think, and ideally, I should be free of self and like self-grasping, and you know, and that's where it really, like, you start pinching us. That's where the suffering in spirituality really comes in, is those really unhelpful stories of like, I shouldn't have a desire to be accepted, for example. I mean, it's just a fucking primal, very deep need or want to be accepted. I should be above that. I should, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think there's something very rewarding about just accepting your human emotions and not trying to transcend them, because that's kind of you trying to escape as well. That's something that I've really been embracing more, just music and fun and connection and happiness and sadness, like just really engaging in all of it, not trying to push away the negative experiences and cling to the positive experiences, but like just really kind of living life. And obviously in lockdown, it hasn't been that crazy.
You just decided at the
I was
start
just
of the
like
lockdown,
going back through I was going back through my mind. I was like, wait, what stuff have I been doing that has been really living life? I have kind of just been at home the whole time. But
at
it's
times
like
that insight.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have any examples of when that hasn't been the case, you know, of like when you were younger or something, and like a way that you would deal with situations and how that might have shifted.
One thing I was thinking that did tie into the kind of trying to be liked thing was definitely from skateboarding. And I actually noticed that when I've been skateboarding again recently.
Give a disclaimer on just a bit about skateboarding for you growing up, because it was a big part of George's life.
Yeah, so I skated probably for about 10 years or so, about 11 till 21 maybe. And I'm 26 now. Throughout that time, a lot of the time I was skating pretty much every day. Summer holidays as a kid, I was skating like 8 hours a day or something, sometimes more. Recently, I've been skateboarding a little bit more because my little brothers picked it up. Had the occasional nice day where I've gone down to the skate park. But now I really notice people who I gauge as like big important people at the skate park. I want them to see me doing a certain trick. It's interesting just revisiting it and now having much more of an awareness of it and being like, oh, damn, I definitely am doing that on purpose. It's interesting how it was still the same thing that I was doing before, but now I've kind of just got a bit more awareness on it. And I was really noticing like, oh, damn, I'm definitely trying to do it in front of this person, or like starting to try harder when different people arrive. And like similar to the graffiti thing, it's something where now like doesn't like make me feel bad about myself or anything. I don't think, oh, I'm being, what the fuck am I doing? Like I'm a 26-year-old trying to get their attention. Well, I will kind of try and I will think that it's like a loving playfulness of like, what the fuck am I trying to do? Like it just goes back. It's like, you know, mum, look at me, no hands, like on the riding your bike with no hands. Or, you know, getting your mum, wanting your mum to see you jump off a ledge or something like that. Like it's exactly the same thing. It's really interesting to revisit that with kind of more awareness of it and be like, oh yeah, that's definitely what I'm doing. Rather than trying to just push down and think that you're doing everything right or trying to justify how you're behaving or anything like that. It's really interesting to be like, no, I am definitely in a shitty mood because I'm hungry. And I definitely am being a dick. Noticing those things is really good because it means that if someone else points it out about you, then you're not going to be quite as defensive about it because you actually have already acknowledged, like say with the, like I do get in a bit of a shitty mood if I'm hungry. It's weird. So I can go without eating for a long period of time, but it's when I've not eaten and I know there's food near, like either I'm making food or someone else is making food or trying to find somewhere to get food. As soon as that switch goes, now I'm in eating mode. Now I need to eat. As soon as that goes, then I can be very short and get very triggered, basically, by anything. Anything that could like slow down my meal by 20 seconds will become like a massive deal.
Well, that's not everything that is faced can be changed. So you get grumpy when you know there's food around and you're hungry. It's not like you're trying to change that, like, I really mustn't get grumpy. It's like you do get grumpy, but by acknowledging it, you can bring a bit of humor to it. And also you can be hyper vigilant about how you're acting because you're like, I know that I'm on the edge of, I don't know, shoplifting or however you're going to, you know, like whatever you're going to do to try and get that food. Like, so with the awareness there, then it means that there's a lot less danger that you're going to act in an unconscious and like harmful way. Exactly.
You become aware of those things. I know it about myself and I can kind of notice it more now when I'm doing it, but that doesn't mean I'm just there like, oh yeah, I'm just being a dick because I'm hungry, and just like, it's not like, it doesn't excuse the behavior. It just means that you can be like, okay, let me find a way that I can manage this so that I'm not being unpleasant to the people around me. Or if someone says, are you just being a dick because you're hungry? I would have used to say no and kind of reiterated why there was something I was angry about. But now I'm endeavoring to actually realize, okay, no, I am being like that. Still something I'm working on.
I'll keep that in mind for the future.
Yeah. If you just randomly bring a sausage roll out, then I'll be happy. But if you say like, oh yeah, we'll go and get a sausage roll around the corner, it's just like 2 minutes away and it's 3 minutes, then I'm going to get fucking mad. So yeah, now you know how to manage my behavior.
Yeah.
And I'll remember to like all your paintings.
Yeah. Like and comment. Yeah. And share.
That seems like a nice place to end it. Were you going to say the same thing?
I was.
Perfect. We're in sync. Now we've got exactly the same microphones. So this is beautiful.
Yeah, it feels pretty different to record with a microphone. I feel like I'm more poised for this one.
Let's just grab the quote that we've got for next week, just so I make sure I got it right. Okay, so this one is from 𝗚𝗲 Milne, who is the author of Winnie the Pooh and all of those stories. And well, I was going through loads of different quotes and I went to 𝗚𝗲 Milne and looked through. and I've saved like 50 quotes from him. Like he's just got so many beautiful ones. A lot of them maybe not relevant for the podcast, but here's a beautiful one that I like. It goes as follows. Weeds are flowers too, once you get to know them.
That's great.
There we go.
Lovely.
Awesome. We'll see you next week, guys. Have a good old ponder. Yeah. Peace.